to Eric's podcast. Dive into conversations about life, family, and business with your host, Eric. Whether you're looking for practical advice, personal stories, or just a little inspiration, Eric's got you covered. Tune in every week to join the journey and get ready to elevate your game. Now, here's your host, Eric.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Eric's podcast. I'm your host, Eric. And today I'm joined by John David Graham, who is the founder of Good Samaritan Home, a housing and mentoring program that helps men and women restart their lives after prison. He's also an award-winning author with over 30 awards for his novel, Running as Fast as I Can. John, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing? What have you been up to?
Oh, I'm working on the sequel to my novel, so my mind is going in 6 different directions. And of course, there's always technology issues. What I really need is I need a 6th grader to work with me so I can learn this stuff.
Yeah, having technology issues is probably the most frustrating thing. And it also really gives you, really kind of shows, at least for me, how much I rely on it, which kind of makes me a little bit more frustrated because it's like, well, I should be able to just do this without technology, but why do I need technology so badly? I think we have grown accustomed to a lot of the tools and stuff that we use now versus, 30 years ago where we didn't even have like the iPhone or these tablets and stuff. Like you can't actually write on a piece of paper. Now we're just typing on keyboard.
I do. You're much younger than I, but when I was in college, we had to type our papers. We did. If you make a mistake, you had to retype them, the whole paper, and you had to retype them again. And then when you go to the library, of course, you check out the book, you take note cards, you write notes down, and you annotate where it is. So you have a stack of cards. That's how you transfer data. So when I use a phone right now, and I literally did my doctoral research online, and in the comfort of my own chair. So there's a lot of benefits to technology once you get through the gate. It's the gate that's where I trip up.
Once you get through the learning curve, I guess I would say, because there's so much news. I used to be on top of all the new and latest things that would come out, but after having kids and working on starting the company that I'm running now, I have completely lost track. I don't know what's new. I don't know, the VR glasses, the VR headsets and stuff. I don't have one, but I've heard that they're pretty cool to use. I've always been curious about what it would be like to actually own one of those things. But at the same time, I don't think I want my kids growing up with, these goggles. Everyone's wearing these goggles and no one's actually interacting like this anymore.
There's the key right there. I had a podcast interview this morning. We talked about that very thing, mental health issues, though, and this isolation the generation feels. Technology has encouraged that, so you can literally live your world on your phone and wonder why you can't communicate because you're living in a virtual world. Then you couple that with those glasses, and it becomes a literal world to you.
That's true.
Notice those pictures behind me. That's the Chico Mountains on the Mexican border. That's my reality. I go down there and I just hike, and what you can hear is nothing. You feel,
that's nice.
You hear the sound of silence. You are literally 100 miles from any town, and it is a world that just brings some calmness in a very harried soul that we live in today. After about 2 hours of cable news, I could slit my throat or go to West Texas. And
that's good. So tell me a little bit about you mentioned that you were working on your second addition to your book that you wrote, the Running as Fast as I Can. Can you tell me a little bit of what's it about and what led you to writing it?
When Good Samaritan Home is about, we founded that 25 years ago to help people who are struggling more than I was. We work with men coming out of prison, but really it's about second chances. But what I found was that people don't listen to data. I can prove to you that reentry programs are cost effective for the community. It's $109 a day to put somebody in prison. But if they're in the community working after their sentence, they are earning money, they're spending money, they're paying taxes, they're paying child support, and they don't cost us $109 a day. So it's cost effective. But nobody heard that lesson. So I wrote a book called Running as Fast as I Can about somebody like you and me who just struggled finding his niche. He was always running, but never catching up to what he called normal people because of birth or poverty or circumstance, wrong choices. I call it everyone's story. And the book, I worked on it 10 years because I wanted it to be emotional and personal. Not my story, but your story and mine. And the darn thing took off like a rocket when I finally published it after, I must add, 200 rejections. So that was
Wow.
that was a lesson in itself, because nobody wanted to read a book by an unknown author about an unknown character that didn't have any politics. And it turns out that everybody wants to read it. So the average book sells less than 250 copies in a lifetime. Running has sold 12,000 copies just this year, and it's garnered 30 awards. So obviously it's cut a niche. But what happened was people are writing, they're saying, well, what happened to Daniel? What happened to the kids? So now I'm writing a sequel called Requiem, and it's the story. There's a character in there who comes from prison. His name is Charles, and he spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And he becomes a friend and mentor and confidant to Daniel during his own crisis. Well, here we pick up Charles' story. So I'm writing a book. As a white man, I'm writing a book now from the viewpoint of a black man. And but what I found is that Daniel is no different than Charles. Black and white is no different because their stories are their stories. And it's allowed me to see this whole concept of race as it really is. It's a concept. It's not a reality unless we make it a reality. And so we're picking up on the story, and it feels so good to be writing again. Gee, publishing is a pain in the ass, but writing is fun.
How long did it take for you to get your first book, that first one, published?
Well,
what was the process like?
I wrote the first draft in 3 years, and I thought I'm done. And I started pushing it out to publishers and to agents all over the country, thinking I want to go to New York with it. And I was met with crickets, the sound of silence, because there are so many books published that these agents are just flooded, inundated with queries, and they don't have time or the interest. One of the main points in the book was the event at Kent State in 1970 when 4 students were shot by the National Guard. Well, that's a real event. I was part of that whole culture then. But an agent, some young hardbody, said, that can't be true in your book. That's not possible. And that told me volumes about her. And so this book it's a Forrest Gump type of story through history, but it deals with the emotions of Daniel Robinson and his family. And it's about family abuse. It's about sexual abuse. It's about homelessness. It's about second chances, and it's about love and forgiveness. And so we're going to pick up on that theme now. And so I'm researching right now what it was like to live in Cleveland in 1955 in a black ghetto. And it's been eye-opening for me. Yeah, it's amazing. You have to look at maps in a whole different way. What was that like in 1955?
What's been the most eye-opening thing that you come across so far?
Well, I'm early, but what I've found is that there's a real excitement in creating a scene. But here's the problem. I was trained as a journalist, so I can get the facts out. I can tell the story, but can I make you feel that story? So that's where the real thing comes in. They're making it emotional. How do I describe Charles going into a room as a 10-year-old boy and feeling what it's like to be a black man or a black boy in Cleveland in that culture? In 1955, Cleveland was a very industrial city, very wealthy for its time, and there was an influx of the migration from the South of black people. And so there was a lot of kickback from the white community, particularly the Eastern Europeans. And so there's this racial tension that's underlying everything. And the key theme of this particular scene is Mama says that to Charles, don't you never trust the white man. And you and I can't understand that. But from my dealings with people coming out of the South, if you don't remember that, you will end up at the end of a rope. And that's hard to imagine. But when you see the world through a different perspective, where you and I can walk into a room and assume that we can do certain things. But I've had many people tell me, don't make eye contact. Don't say that. Or you've heard the phrase, I had to have the talk with my son. That means I had to tell him about how to deal with the police for getting picked up while driving black. And again, you and I can't understand that, but this is a part of the black culture that I'm learning about.
Wow. How did you, so that's that's pretty fascinating, actually, to really to do all that research to be able to write a really good quality novel. I never really thought about how much research actually goes into something like that. But yeah, I can definitely see how it would pay off in terms of being able to create a really good quality world and narrative, for sure.
What happens if you don't watch your details, you lose credibility. For example, in the original book, Running, Daniel visits inner city Detroit after the riots, and the riots occurred in a certain part of Detroit, and I had to follow that with the street names. So I had to take a map and go from street to street to get my details, even though it wasn't a main part of the story. If I had the wrong street or the wrong date, the reader would catch that, and it's like a stone. You trip over it, and they'll never catch you again. But if you're credible, they'll follow you into your story.
Yeah. And they'll look forward to the next one, the sequel.
That's right.
Can you tell me?
There's a sense of trust.
Yeah, exactly. Can you go into a little bit of Good Samaritan and how you got that started? And what was the struggles that you came across in trying to start that?
Well, I had been through what I call a lot of detours in my life. I had multiple careers. I was a truck driver, a fireman, a building contractor, a journalist. I was even a minister at one point, and I just never did well at it because I just didn't feel like I found my niche until I was 53. And I kept running across homeless persons, and I didn't know how to handle it. And I remember my own days as being homeless. And I told my wife, let's do something at this stage in our life where let's try to give back to people who are struggling more than us. And so we bought an old house that was 150 years old, needed a lot of work. And we committed to fixing that up and using it as a shelter. And I formed a nonprofit called Good Samaritan Home. And we started doing that. And the Department of Corrections said, we have men coming from prison who need temporary shelter. If you will house them, we will help compensate you for the per diem. And so we ended up with a contractual relationship where homeless persons were able to find legitimate, safe housing, and we were able to find a stable financial stream. And Good Samaritan went from one house to today, after 24 years, we have 19 houses in the
Wow.
in the Western Ohio region. And we have helped house and mentor 2,500 men and women coming from prison. And so I found my niche. I found that niche from that.
Definitely. How do you, what does the mentoring program look like? How did you guys, is it like did you just come up with it on your own? Did you do any research on what needs to be done? Did you try a bunch of different things before you landed on like, this is the structure we want to do it? How did that form?
I wish I were that planned and I had everything laid out. Mostly I just jump in and say, now, which way is the water flowing and how do I swim? But what happened was, mentoring is not something where you sit down and say, we're going to have this class. We partner with the Department of Correction, the Parole Department, Job and Family Services, the Mental Health Department. We don't do any of their work, but they don't offer housing. But what I found is that men coming from prison, just like you and me, we just want somebody to listen to us. Particularly if we're down on our luck, we don't want to be preached at. We don't want to be we don't want to be told you have to come to church and then you'll be fine. What we want is, I'm hungry and I'm cold. Can you help? I just want a hand up. I don't want a hand out. And so we ask the question, are you hungry? And so we offer a safe place. Now, but to do that, that means you have to make your bed in the morning. You have to cook your own food. You have to clean after yourself. In other words, you have to be a responsible housemate. And I call it a pronoun shift, because what got you to prison is saying I. And what'll keep you out of prison is saying we. So through housekeeping and through being respectful to your roommate, we're mentoring this idea of we. And it's not a class. It's just, I call it the cost of your rent. Make your bed.
That's good.
So it's actually a very good lesson, because it shows respect for yourself too.
True. Yeah. Do you think that your own experience with homelessness helped you understand their kind of what they're going through?
Oh, not even a question. You know, I had at the time I had a college degree. You would think that you would never have to worry about homelessness, but one wrong decision, an economic downturn, or let's suppose you work for the government right now and your whole agency was shut down and you are now, with a master's degree in economics, homeless or near homeless because your job. Or you work for the auto companies and all of a sudden the plant closed down and you lost your job and the only thing available is McDonald's. So homelessness is not them. It's not those people. It's through a quirk of the economy or a quirk in politics. It could be you and me. And I never forget what it's like to look at the sky and say, where am I going to sleep tonight because it's going to rain? And that's a frightening feeling.
How long would that go on for?
Now, that was limited, I have to admit. But what happened was I met my wife, and she was working. She had a house, and we started dating. And I suddenly said, I'm going to get real serious about getting any job. So, and she said, no job, no girlfriend. And she stuck to it, and eventually we got married. But when I did meet her, I was homeless at the time, living in my truck. So
wow. So like that's some good motivation then.
It's a
life going.
All her friends said, don't marry me, because they said I was a rake and a rambler. And I said, well, I'm no rake, but I am a rambler. So even her pastor wouldn't marry us.
Wow.
But
how did you like, what did you do to get out of sleeping in your car? Like, how did did you just do job applications and that's the regular way? Because I've heard that it's that a lot of employers don't necessarily, like, if you look a certain way or if you are homeless, they don't want to hire you, even if you are qualified for the job. How did that experience turn out for you?
Well, maybe part of it, I was in Detroit at the time, and part of it is that white privilege we're talking about. Detroit's a very divided city. And I had a neighbor, my wife had a neighbor who worked for a laundry company, and they were looking for drivers. And I had been a truck driver. So he referred me, and I was able to get a job as a route driver for several years. And so that was able to, that got, of course, I had a family, and we soon had children. So there are many a day when you have a family, you make decisions that you wouldn't make as a single person. You go to work even though you don't feel like it. You stay with a job even though you think it's not paying you enough until you find another job. But being quite candid, I always thought that I could do better. And that's when I decided to work for myself in construction. But the problem is, working for yourself is very difficult at the end of the day to make money. You may work hard, but you have to get the jobs, you have to do the jobs, you have to get the payment for the jobs. And it's tough being self-employed. And we end up traveling 3 states trying to make a living, all with my family in tow. So
Wow.
The rambling days were not over, but they were just more involved. And that's what brought that into Good Samaritan Home.
Oh, okay, I see. So that's where your the construction and everything, I bet, played a good role in being able to help build Samaritan Home.
But here's the thing, is that the detours actually can help you if you learn from them. Yes, I learned as a journalist how to express myself in writing. I learned as a truck driver how to manage my schedule. I learned as a contractor how to work with my hands. And all of that came into Good Samaritan Home.
And now you said 10 homes? 19. Wow. Are you still growing?
Yes, we're looking
do you still have plans?
There's the thing about rehabilitation is it's not a hug a thug program. It's not soft on crime program. It's a way of saying that we're willing to offer you a chance, but you have to pick up that chance and run with it. So if you don't have a place to sleep, you can't get a job. So if I give you a place to sleep and you respond by keeping it clean, I won't charge you a dime for that. And you can stay for 6 months or even a year, but you need to be moving towards your own place. And that's where the mentoring comes in. How are you saving your money? Where are you looking for an apartment? Yeah, and little things like, how can I help you find a place? And we don't do it for them, but we encourage. That's the mentoring.
Okay, that makes sense. So you guys did you say you are expanding or you have plans to expand?
Well, we're running at capacity right now. On any given day, we might have 100 men and women in our houses, and we're always getting referrals. So I don't like to turn somebody down. So we're looking for another house or two just to allow room for growth. And to be candid, every time we've grown, it's been a leap of faith because there's no guarantee. And you're taking on a mortgage, you're taking on utilities, you're taking on maintenance. But I feel that we look at it like a business. We don't want to lose money. We're not here to profit from it. We're here to break even. And so far, the truth is, our budget now is $2 million a year. So
wow.
It runs efficiently as a business because we're not trying to run it as a business. We're trying to run it as what we call a ministry. So we're accountable to more than the governor.
Yeah. How did the process go with actually getting your nonprofit status? Because I've heard that it can take a really long time to get that. And how was that process for you in trying to start this?
First thing I had to do was apply to the Secretary of State. You have to become a legal nonprofit corporation, a 501c3. But that's fairly easy. The issue is getting the IRS to approve it. And that takes about 6 months if you're lucky. And you have to prove, because everybody is looking for a quick get-rich-quick scheme, particularly back in the early 2000s when there was what we call a faith-based initiative. President Bush encouraged faith-based communities to do services like ours. And what happens was some people were just looking for grants, because you have to be a nonprofit to get a grant. And so there were a lot of fly-by-nights, and the IRS was scrutinizing us. I say it was a colonoscopy of all my book work, and rightfully so. And it took about a year, but in the process, now we are also audited not just by the IRS. We're audited by my accountant and by the Department of Correction on our performance. So every year they go over all our properties, all our performance schedules, and they even talk to our residents to make sure they feel we're doing a good job. And that makes us better.
Yeah. And that's good to have that kind of feedback loop and accountability too.
And the truth is that Ohio is a very progressive state when it comes to rehabilitation, probably about as far ahead of the curve as any entity I've seen to date. I've been privileged to work with them in partnership like this.
How, going back to the nonprofit status and the application, you mentioned grants. Have you ever applied for or have been granted a grant?
Oh, yes. Initially, we did apply for grants, federal grants, state grants, local grants. But it not that it's bad, it's just a lot of work. It's akin to doing a doctoral thesis every time a grant comes due. And
wow.
And it may be a 40-page document, and they have a certain language for each entity requires. And then there are people out there who know how to write them. They may not perform them well, but they can write them well. And they're big dogs, and they have the money to hire somebody full time. So I can't tell you how many times I would spend days and weeks and months on a grant just to be turned down because the competition was so great.
Awesome. Well, Mr. Graham, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. This is great. It was great having you on the show, and we'll have to have you back. Thank you. Okay.
Welcome to Eric's podcast. Dive into conversations about life, family, and business with your host, Eric. Whether you're looking for practical advice, personal stories, or just a little inspiration, Eric's got you covered. Tune in every week to join the journey and get ready to elevate.